Hello, hello, and welcome. My name is Jessie Robertson, and here on my channel, I teach new full-length, step-by-step acrylic painting tutorials each week. Now, in this acrylic painting tutorial, we'll be working on a charming autumn scene featuring a chickadee perched on an ear of corn next to a vibrant pumpkin. Throughout the class, I'm going to show you how to use layering techniques to build up textures through value and color, while also teaching you how to mix autumn colors and to draw without tracing. Breaking objects down into basic shapes helps train your brain to see the world in terms of shape, texture, and color, an essential skill set for any artist. The objective of my tutorials is to help you understand key techniques and practices so you can feel more confident with acrylic paint. But remember, the most important thing is to have fun along the way. This class will be free all week long, and if you like lifetime access, you can tip to own for a copy to keep for just $5, and a copy of this class will be sent right to your email. You can access it anytime. If you're ready for even more painting, you can join my Academy, which gives you access to not only this class, but over 531 other classes, courses, and challenges that are available inside my membership. All right, if you're ready, let's get painting. We're going to start by going over our supplies. First and foremost, you're going to need something to paint on. I'm working on a size 12 by 12 inch stretched canvas. Along with the canvas, you're going to want something absorbent to help dry off your brushes like paper towel or even old rags and old socks. You'll also need a big jar of water. We use water to mix into our paint to make them more fluid, and of course, because acrylics are water soluble, it means you can clean your brushes with water as well. Always keep a jar handy by. I'm right-handed, so I like to keep my water on my right-hand side. For paint colors, we have a limited palette. Today we're going to be mixing our oranges. We're going to be mixing these beautiful warm greens as well. I'll show you the colors I use, but please feel free to just approximate the colors. If you use a different red, yellow, or blue, you'll just get a slightly different brown. They'll all be lovely, I promise. So for today's class, I'm going to be using a bright warm red called cadmium red, medium hue. You could also use any primary red, pyrrole red, it's all good. So nice bright red. Cadmium yellow, medium hue. I like cadmium yellow medium for autumn paintings because it has a lovely, deep, warm undertone to it. If you contrast that with, well, this is Liquitex's primary red. It leans a little bit more to the cool side. It's not quite as warm as this yellow. Both of these will mix lovely oranges, but I really like having a more warm yellow to begin with for autumn palettes. But grab yourself a yellow. For our sky, I'm using, this paint tube is a little painted over, but you can see the color there. This is ultramarine blue. For the soft blue sky, you could mix up your blue. It's just going to give you a slightly different sky color. But as you know, the sky changes every day, ranging from turquoise to gray, even black when it's really stormy. You can get purpley blues, turquoise blues, so any blue will do. But today I'm using ultramarine. We'll also be using burnt umber brown, some green. I'm starting with this Hooker's Green pigment. This is the Hooker's Green Hue Permanent. It's a lovely grassy green color, and we're going to be mixing some warm tones into this to give it more of an autumny feel. I also want you to grab titanium white and a nice dark black. Today I'm using Mars Black. Along with your canvas and paints, you're going to need a palette. I actually just use glass cutting board. So here's a glass cutting board, and I don't use the textured side. That's too difficult to clean, but the shiny side of a glass cutting board, you can use the same palette for a lifetime. So these make wonderful palettes. You just scrape the paint off after it's dry. And for brushes for today, we'll be using the ones I have set out here. I'm going to hold them up close so you can approximate the shape and size if you're rooting through your own collection. a number 8 Filbert brush, a number 6 bright brush. This is a brand new brush. You'll want some little round brushes for details. I have 2 round brushes that I'll be using today. These are different sizes, both very small though. You can see how small compared to my finger. This is a size 1, the smaller one is a size 0. So really tiny. This one's older, so it's a bit more rough. This one's finer for details, so I might use the older brush. Still has a nice small point to it, but for filling in the bigger areas of the Chickadee, the small one though that has the really intact tip is going to be amazing for the smallest details in this painting. That's the eye and the little highlight on the beak of the Chickadee. So never throw out your ratty brushes. They're amazing for textures like feathers, grass, that kind of thing, organic shapes. We will be using a script liner, one of my favorite brushes. A 1/4 inch flat brush. This size of brush is really handy for today's painting, and I did use it for the bulk of a lot of our painting. The corn, the pumpkin, the handle. I used a little 1/4 inch wisp brush as well. A big bristly fan. As well as this tiny mini fan. This is a size 10-0 fan. It's an acrylic fan brush made of nylon. This is a fantastic brush for loose organic marks. I included a palette knife in the list of brushes for today's painting. I did only use this for some of these long skinny lines in the distant wheat field or distant cornfield here. So I used it for some of the skinny lines in the background. You don't have to have this, but the palette knife, because look at how thin the edge is when you turn it on its side, it can be a really wonderful mark making tool for some of these loose organic textures and the skinniest, finest lines. We're going to do a tiny little bit of drawing in the beginning of our painting to block out the composition. So you might want to grab a pencil. Any pencil will do. I think this is a number 2 pencil. Last but not least, I always paint along with my trusty blow dryer and a spray bottle full of water set on the fine mist setting as opposed to the jet. That's it for supplies, so let's go ahead and start step 1. We're going to do a little bit of sketching to begin, just our pumpkin and our corn. I'm going to take some sticks here and I'm going to block out our composition into thirds. So I'm going to cut it into thirds vertically, and then I'm also going to cut it into thirds horizontally. With this grid on, we can see roughly where different elements of the painting sit inside of this simple grid of thirds. Grab your pencil. And this doesn't have to be perfect. You can just eyeball out thirds. I like to use paint brushes or something just to give myself rough thirds. If you feel like your proportions are way, way off, you can always test it. You can measure, or you could just pinch a brush and make sure that all of your segments are roughly the same size. So this segment goes from here to here. This one's good. This one could be moved in a little bit. Okay, so these are going to be our markers for our vertical thirds. And then you're just going to roughly sketch this up. So this is a gridding method used to help place objects on the picture plane. So here I've got my vertical thirds. I'm going to do the same thing now horizontally. A little something like this. And we can see there's a lot of action in the center of the painting here. The corn is sitting atop the pumpkin. In the center of the pumpkin where the vine came out, which the handle of the pumpkin sits in the center area here. The chickadee is facing the center, and even his the bird's breast is in the center here. So we've got little bits of all three of our characters kind of converging in the center of our painting. And we're going to use these lines as a rough guide for sketching on our pumpkin. Now the pumpkin, we're going to pretend we have X-ray vision and we can see through the corn. You can see in this lower section of the painting, the bottom of the pumpkin comes about halfway up this lower third. So if we were kind of to look at this little line here, the pumpkin on this line here comes about halfway up this line for the bottom of it. The top of the pumpkin, and imagine the pumpkin is just an oval shape without the handle, comes just a little bit below this line here, so a little bit below. And then the edge of it goes from this third here and all the way over, almost to the edge over here. So let's just draw ourselves a little pumpkin. Something like this, a little oval shape. So here's our oval for our pumpkin. And you can kind of look at the negative space, the space that the sky fills in, to gauge if we have our shape accurate as well. So you can see, for instance, the sky from this corner to about here comes down. If I were to draw a line halfway up this, it comes right down to about halfway. So that means I could actually pull my pumpkin up a little higher because mine was converging more down on this line. So I can come up to about halfway. Let's see, there we go. Okay, so here is our little pumpkin as a round oval shape. The handle of the pumpkin is going to sit in the center of this shape here. And the center of this shape is about here. And it's going to sit inside the pumpkin. And you can draw a little oval shape to represent the bottom of the pumpkin stem. The pumpkin stem will follow this line. It almost comes straight up and then just arcs over a little bit. So that pumpkin stem is going to come straight up and it just kind of arcs a little bit into this upper third, doesn't it? So the basic shape is a little something like this. We're going to lose some of this shape as we paint in our background. But I like sketching the whole thing in. Gives us kind of a bit of practice and a bit of warm up. We're also going to have this cob of corn, which we can draw a little line to represent the axis of this corn. And you can see where it cuts through these thirds. It comes right from the lower area, right about here. If we're looking at this square, it comes about halfway up and it leans up. We're looking at the center of the corn like this. Look where it comes in relation to this corner here. It kind of comes just above this corner here and all the way down. So I would say this is a good access for the line that goes right through the middle of the corn, coming kind of just above this corner. And the shape of the corn will be a little something like this. The cob of the corn. And I'm going to draw a little base for the cob. We're going to not have the skin on the outside of the ear of the corn peeling off. We're just going to have the little base where the stalk of the corn connects to the cob. And then later on, we'll draw some little rough bits of dried skin peeling off of this beautiful cob of corn. But for now, it sits about here, like this. And I want to do one more thing, which is blocking in some of the shape and texture of the pumpkin. Now, we're not going to need our thirds to sketch in these shapes anymore. So we can go ahead and remove them. We're going to have some sections where the side of the pumpkin has some nubbly bubblies, and the dark lines represent the grooves where the flesh bubbles out and then indents. And we do have one of those. If you look where it sits in relation to the corn, there's one that is about right here. It's going to arc out really close to the cob of corn and down. Pinch it in up towards the handle, the stem of the pumpkin. And then this shape can be a bit wider on the bottom, and it's really going to come in to a little bit more of a point where it comes in towards the handle right here. Then we're going to have another little section that's going to bubble up, and this one's kind of in behind, but it's going to bubble up, and it would, if we had X-ray vision again and could see in behind our cob of corn, it's going to come up and it would come down and back in like this. And these would continue around the pumpkin. So on the back of the pumpkin, these little bubbles would just be kind of coming up and back like this. Okay. Let's have another one. We've got this big one here. Let's have another one, not two actually, on this side here. So a bit wider on the bottom. We're going to come up and then we're going to lean it in at the center. And again, at the top where it hits the handle, it can even bubble up like this. Then we're going to have another one starting from the center, all things leading to that first center ring where the stem comes out. And then up and over like this and in. Okay. Good. So here we have the texture of the grooves in this pumpkin. And it will be darker in the grooves. Okay. Let's do a little tweak on the handle of the pumpkin. So the handle, if you've never seen a pumpkin vine, there's a big vine and it comes out of the ground, and off the vine there's these little side vines that come out, and attached to each side vine there is a pumpkin. And when you harvest the pumpkin, you snip the vine, and that's what creates the handle. But all the flesh kind of grows around the stem, which feeds the nutrients to the plant as it grows. And so it's attached to the pumpkin. So at the base, we're gonna kind of spread it out into these grooves of the pumpkin. So I'm gonna open it up a little bit at the bottom, like this. So kind of growing around these nubbly bubblies. And then see, it's almost like the roots of a tree. We're spreading it out at the bottom. And the handle itself has a few little grooves in it. One that might come up and over like this. And then another one kind of coming from this groove up and over like this. And it might be jagged a little bit because when you cut the vine, it's not always a clean cut. This is going to be the shape of our pumpkin. This is going to be it for the drawing for now. We will draw our chickadee on later. If you've never drawn a bird before, don't worry, we will go step by step together, coming up with a good drawing, a good composition before you start painting can save yourself a lot of effort later on, just doing a little bit of mapping out of where we're going to place things. Our little bird will also be basic shapes. It'll be sitting about right here, really close to the pumpkin. And I promise the chickadee is just going to be a series of ovals, circles, and triangles. And it's going to map out to a bird shape really, really quite beautifully, okay? But we're going to do that later. For now, we're going to paint the sky in the background. So that's it for the composition sketch. Let's start pouring some of our colors. With our composition sketch on, we're going to start building up our background colors. So no details at this point, and we're not going to do the foreground elements, the pumpkin or the corn. We're going to block in the basic sections of color that we see, the cloud, the sky, the warm tones and behind these distant plants, and the really dark colors we see here that are a base layer to go underneath the grasses and bits of leaves that we see. So we're gonna need to pour out some colors, which I've started doing here. You'll need a little squirt of your ultramarine blue, just a little one. And then I want you to pour out 2 little blobs of white, one here, one here. Keep some separation. I like to keep 1 blob of white for my cool colors and 1 for the warm colors. We're going to take a squirt of some cadmium red, or any nice bright red, 2 big dollops, or even 3 of the yellow, and some of our hooker's green. So we've got our primaries, red, yellow, blue, and some green. You're also going to squeeze out a little bit of some burnt umber brown. And right at the end of this tube, grab your number 6 bright brush and let's go ahead and mix some colors. We're going to start with orange. To mix orange, you're going to start with a larger dollop of yellow and then start adding little bits of red really slowly. So this one little bit of red for this huge dollop of yellow. Orange is a color we're going to use quite frequently, so mix a really large amount. So you can see I have quite a few big juicy dollops of this color, about 3 times this amount. And this is just a little bit of red into some yellow, and it makes a beautiful orange color. I'm going to take a little bit of red. I'm going to divide this color in half and add a bit more red to some of the orange. You can get a really wide variety of oranges just by adding either more red or more yellow. So here is a really, really juicy reddish orange color. So here we have the reddish orange. This is the yellow that has just a little bit of red in it. And if I were to add even more yellow to a segment of this orange, we'd get a really lovely, so you can see it just gets more and more of this yellow color in there. Then it just gets to be lighter and lighter oranges till it's almost yellow. So here's a beautiful array of autumn oranges. We're going to use some of our orange in our green as well. Now let's get these colors ready to roll so that we can just start painting right away. We can add orange to some green to create a beautiful autumnal green. I'm going to take some of this hooker's green, and if I add a little bit of white to it, you can really see the underlying hue of this green. It's a bright, bright grassy green. So here's the green with just a little bit of white in it, and you can see it's a really super vibrant green color. I'm going to add some orange to the green. I'm going to take some of this more yellowish orange and I'm going to add it to the green, and it makes a beautiful warm yellowy green. If I add a little more white to this, you can really see the warmth coming through in this green as opposed to the coolness of this green. And let's take some of our green and add some of the more reddish orange to the green. So we're going to add more of the reddish orange to the green. And it's going to look almost brown. The red really neutralizes or mutes the green. And when you mute a color, it turns either brownish or grayish. And I'll show you another example of that. So here we've got a really beautiful kind of brownish green. And if I add a bit of white, you'll see that it's got more of a brownish color to it. So you can mix a wide variety of warm greens by adding the orange to the green. Underneath our painting over here, we've got some grayish blues as well in this underpainting. And to mix a grayish color, another neutral color, I'm going to take a bit of brown and mix it with my blue. I'm using ultramarine blue and burnt umber brown. And if I add a bit of white to that, you'll see it creates more of a grayish color. So here is the ultramarine blue with the brown. And if I add a bit more white, once again, you'll see this is a beautiful steely grayish blue. We've got some of that in our background over here underneath. It's kind of a grayish color. We're just going to put in this really simple soft field of color as opposed to the sky, which is going to be pure. Let's mix this sky color, take a little bit of ultramarine blue and add a lot of white. And it creates a sky blue, really beautiful blue. Ultramarine blue plus white. Here's ultramarine blue with just a little bit less white, so it's kind of darker. This is a beautiful color palette, and this is what we're going to be working with for the whole tutorial. Actually, let's mix one more color, which is going to be our shadow color. So the color is kind of in here, which is brown, but I've added some red to it to make it really warm. And the brownish dark really contrasts against these warm green grasses. So if I take some burnt umber brown and add some red, it's just going to make a beautiful dark reddish brown. And then here's the plain burnt umber brown. It's harder to see when the color is in its matte tone because they're both so dark. But if I were to take some clean water and spread it thin, you can see the undertone of the color a little bit better. So this is going to be our beautiful autumn color palette. Let's get painting. This part of the painting is so fun, fast, and loose. Let's begin with our number 8 Filbert and scoop up some of that really, really light ultramarine blue with white so that we get a big, juicy scoop. And now our cloud over this kind of 1/3 area, it kind of bubbles up here. So we're gonna roughly sketch these little bubbles for the clouds. Kind of comes in like this. And then this kind of blue sky really peters off and up. You can even add some white in here if you feel like your color is too dark. And you can wrap your paint around the side edges as you go. Let's wiggle in. I would rather you focus on the front than the sides during the wet on wet blending portion of today's class, which is now. So to wiggle in some of this sky color. rinse off that Filbert brush. And let's take a little bit of some of our warm green. It doesn't really matter which one. It could be the more orangish red or the more yellowy red. It's all good. I'm going to take a bit of a darker value of our green along the side of the pumpkin. I'm going to take a little bit of our gray color too. Add a little bit of white into it. I'm going to wiggle some of that in here. Coming roughly around the pumpkin if you can. But we're probably going to go over the handle a little bit. Wiggle some of this color up and into the sky. Let's take some of our grayish color. Along the edge of the cob of the corn. This will be our cloud in here, so we're going to leave that. Some of these light greens in here. Great. Now we're going to take our fan brush and we're going to start to soften this together using some light yellow. So I'm going to take some white on the warm side, this white, and let's add a little tiny bit of yellow, just a little. Should still be really, really light yellow. And let's start to pull our cloud up, down towards the colors. We're not overlapping them just yet, but we will in a second. So kind of pulling in just this general shape of our cloud. I've got a nice juicy layer of color, you guys. You can see some of my brush strokes. And now I'm going to take my brush and lightly kind of feather with all that kind of light cloud color still on there. I'm going to lightly feather some of this darker color up and in, blending it into the bottom of the cloud. Now, I'm picking up the green, so I don't want to go over the tip of the cloud. I'm just going to lightly feather along the bottom, blending it in a little bit. Same thing up here. I'm going to take my brush and use the tip of the brush, this long skinny edge of the brush. I'm going to come up, just softening the edge. Right now it's all about softness. I'm painting a little green around my sides. This edge should be really soft, some distant plants. Rinse off your bristly fan brush, rinse it in the water. Tap the edge on your napkin so your brush is mostly clean and damp. And now we can come up and feather some of the top of this cloud into the blue. Softening that edge, and I'm going to touch the green again. Maybe even get a bit of my stormy blue under here. That ultramarine blue with the brown. I'm going to put a bit of a darker version of that bluish brown down here a little, maybe even a little right here. Gets a little bit darker. And you can use your bluish brown or your plain brown. You can see where it gets darker down here. So we're going to start layering that in. And the trick to this wet on wet blending is don't go all over. We have to learn how to soften just an edge. So not the whole thing, kind of softening just one little part of the painting. And that can be tricky. So the way to do that is to be mindful of whatever color is on your brush. Work fast and loose. Okay, so I rinse my brush, tap it off on a clean part of the napkin. I want to soften this a little bit before it dries. So I'm going to take this clean brush. I'm going to work this edge just so it's really soft. And you can use all the edges of your brush. I can even use the side of my brush like this. This is distant foliage in the distance. We'll add detail later. This is just a mass tone of everything that's going on in the background. I've touched the light color, so I can come down into the dark without doing much moving. But now I've touched the dark color. If I tap up, it's going to move it. But that's okay. We can soften this dark edge over here too, just hovering. Again, not all over, just in a controlled manner. If we want, if our other side of our brush is clean, we can flip that and use this side to blend the soft, lighter areas. Or we can realize we have the dark on our brush, but always look at the tip of your brush, okay? So I can now bring some of that dark texture up here if I want it darker, and use the fact that I have some extra color going on here. Or if I don't want that color, rinse, tap off the excess water. Always just kind of tap it on the napkin. I'm gonna just soften this again. You've got this. No matter what with an acrylic painting, the more you experiment, the more you'll feel confident and comfortable with the medium. And even if you don't do something you don't like at all, it's really easy to just let it dry and then do another layer on top, okay? There are no times where I completely lost a painting. It can always be recovered. It's just, do you want to spend the time and energy recovering it is up to you, but you can always recover by painting areas out. Okay, it's all just fun, learning, practice, exploring. So I'm showing you some ways that you can create masses of color with soft edges, which is really nice for these backgrounds. Starting with some of these cooler colors, we'll layer warmer colors on top. I'm gonna do a little bit more in the cloud, a bit more kind of dragging off the side edges. I'm gonna rinse my fan brush off. I held up close so you could see how much paint I had on my painting, that you could see some visible brush strokes because I worked it for a long time. And acrylic paints dry fast, and the more dry it is in your area, the faster it will dry. Or if you have a wood stove on or an air conditioner, any kind of heating unit where the air might be drier, is going to cause your paint to dry faster because this paint dries by evaporation, where the water evaporates out of the acrylic medium and then it dries to a really impervious, solid plastic film. The more paint we put on our canvas, the longer we have to blend it around. I want to work. I can see my blues getting almost dry. So I'm going to come back into this warm, light yellow color. I'm going to add a bit more. I'm purposefully not going to be touching my green very much here. I'm going to create a big cumulus cloud. Let me snuggle in. So I'm going to come up here and I'm going to be like using just the tip. They have kind of bubbly edges, don't they? And maybe my cloud is disappearing behind these shrubs over here. I'll blend that edge in a bit in a minute. And then maybe even my blue is really starting to dry, so I've got to push a bit harder or have a damp brush. Making sure my brush is clean. I'm going to quickly do some of these little clouds breaking apart, lightly dusting over the surface here, just lightly. This is called scumbling, where you kind of just drag the brush across. Okay, just a little bit of paint, lightly. I'm almost using the fat part of the brush, but I'm only letting little bits touch. And this, remember, if you remember, is where the chickadee is going to be sitting. So this lightness will help pop the blackness of the cap, of the black cap chickadee, a little darkness on its head. Okay, so here my background's starting to dry a little bit more. There are two things I can do to try to blend this area now that it is dry. I can take a clean, damp brush and try to, I don't want it soaking, but just a little bit of water. And I can try to feather it together. Or if it's beyond, it's like it's too dry, you can add just a little bit of your wet color and then just rework the edge. To do this wet on wet blending, you just need to have two edges that are wet. This whole area can be like a mottled or broken, variegated texture because it is just a bunch of plants off in the distance. Now that we have finished our front, I feel more comfortable painting the edge because we've done all that wet and wet blending. But you gotta work fast and loose, so relax, but you wanna relax kind of fast for these techniques. There'll be time for just sitting back and contemplating detail later. For now, we gotta work it to get these soft masses of color in here. All right, you deserve a break. Roll your shoulders. I hope you have your favorite Painty Day beverage. Have a sip of it. Your coffee, your tea, your water, your wine, whatever makes you feel relaxed and fine. To stop my paints from drying out on my palette, I use my spray bottle and I lightly mist the tops of the paints. Not so much that they're swimming, but just enough to keep them from kind of crusting over on top. And if you're painting outside or if it's really dry, that light misting about every 15 minutes, or when they just look thirsty, like you'll get to know the paint gets less shiny as it starts to dry, and any areas that you mix and spread thin will dry faster. So it might be every 4 minutes you missed it. Might only be 30 minutes if it's humid. Let's get into filling in the background of the forest floor, the garden floor. This is clearly a garden. Someone's harvesting their corn and their pumpkins, and this opportunistic chickadee is flying down to see what he can score. It's time to fill in the bottom portion of our background. Let's come into some of a warm green. Maybe a little bit under this cob of corn, next to this pumpkin. Just kind of filling right in up to this line of the ground. And then we're going to switch to a really dark color, our brownish red. So rinse your brush. Some of the brownish red color under the pumpkin, touching right up into the bottom of the pumpkin. And you can fill in with your dark brown, your brownish red right to the bottom and wrap it around the lower edge if you're on a canvas that has a wooden stretcher. So if you're painting on like a hardboard, like masonite, like a wooden panel, you won't have this side edges. Or if you're painting on paper, but on stretched canvas we do, so we can paint the edges if we want. And again, just kind of soften the dark color into whatever is next to it. Even if it's dry, you can just lightly feather with a damp brush, and that will even help blending on the background, which is totally dry, which mine is pretty dry now. This serves as a base coat. Nice thing about having a dark base coat is it allows the light colors which are layered on top to show. You cannot see lights unless there are darks in behind them to pop them out. With this, we are done the base coat for our background. With the base layer on, we're going to add a few details into our background before we keep going, including some of the plants in the distance. We've got these different cobs of corn. And I like to use my little tiny fan brush for some of these marks. That's this little brush right here. Okay. We're going to make some skinny lines, and then we're going to pull some leaves coming off the stalks of our plant. So let's practice our brushwork. We'll grab just a little scrap piece of paper. And we do a lot of our practice for drawing flowers, little crystals and sweet peas. Okay. So with this brush, you have that razor sharp edge and also a wide section. To get fine lines, we need to add water to whatever color we're using. And you don't, if you're practicing along with me, don't worry about what color we use for the practice. I'm going to use this mix of blue and brown, and I'm adding water to my paint until it's about the consistency of maple syrup. Tap the brush off because it's loaded with paint. Okay, and now with runny paint, but just a little bit, turn your brush the long skinny way and draw up. The paint has to be runny for this. So you should be able to get some nice thin lines with just the tip of this brush. If you're struggling, you can also use a script liner, which is a brush like this here. You need to wet your script liner, so fill the whole belly of the bristles with water, dip it into the runny paint. This brush soaks up a ton of paint, and with this brush, you can see it's about to drip off the tip there. So it's going to be a bigger line at first with all that water on, but the more we stroke with this brush, pushing very lightly, and the more it kind of runs out of water, we can get some of the finest lines. And this will be the stalks of the plant. From here, we're going to bend some leaves off the shafts of our plant. There's a variety of brushes that you can use for this, but let me show you with that little fan brush. So once you can make some thin lines, you're going to, let's say there's a stalk right here, this darker one right here. I'm going to come off the stalk holding the brush vertical, completely vertical. I'm going to come off with that skinny line, and then I'm going to fold over using half the brush to come over. Then I have to twist it so I get the fine point again. It's a stroke you need to practice a little bit. So starting with the skinny side of the brush, you're going to come up, and then you're going to push a little bit harder. You can use whole half of the brush, come down, but if I keep going, that's going to be a straight point. So I have to lift the brush so it's just the corner to get the skinny tip. So up, skinny, over, I'm using that whole fat side of the brush. And then I have to twist it or lift it to get the skinny tip. This gets some really, really beautiful organic marks. Again, up, up, fat side, skinny tip, up, curve using that whole side of the brush, and skinny tip. You can use other brushes like a flat brush for this, where you just kind of come up, over, and then it's similar though, you got to lift lighter pressure, okay? So up using the edge of the brush, oops, in that watery paint. Skinny side, bend over using the whole fat part, and then either kind of twist so you've got the corner. And we can pull the leaves off our corn like this. And at the ends, we're gonna do some little tapping where the ears of the corn are. They kind of grow off multiple spots of the plant. And that will be the marks for our cornfield. It's a very abstract and it's very in the distance. I don't want you to worry too much. You can see these marks in the painting right here. So skinny side, fat, skinny, fat. I have them kind of throughout the painting here, and then at the top I've just really softly kind of widened the tips. Really abstract marks using those brush strokes. We're gonna do this using this light warm brown or light warm brownish green color. So we can still use our warm green, but I want to show you how to mix a light golden, almost like a sepia brown color. I'm going to use my mini fan for this. You can use a flat brush if you don't have one. You can take some brown and then rinse your brush and grab some of your orange and mix it in with your brown. And this should give you a really beautiful sepia brown color. So that's some burnt umber brown with a lot of orange. And that's going to give you a warm brown like this. If I have more red in it, it'll be a bit more of a orangey brown. Okay, but it's a light sepia brown color that we're after here. You can add a tiny little bit of white into your paint, which will lighten the color a little bit. And then once you have a color that you like, add the water. We've got to get some skinny lines up there. And I should show you the skinny lines with the palette knife as well. This could be a fun brush for skinny lines. You're just going to load the side of the brush in the paint. Okay. And then it gets really thin lines. So there's lots of different ways. This doesn't hold as much paint, so you will have to load it, but boy, oh boy, does it get some of the finest lines ever. So you can play with different brushes. I like to show you different options for getting the same marks. And I might start with a few, maybe dark brown skinny lines. Coming straight up. One here. I'm going to use my sepia brown. And maybe have another one coming up here, here. My palette knife in here. When you feel like you're finished with your palette knife, clean it by taking your paper towel or rag and just wipe the tip off. And now let's bend some of those little leaves up and over. That sepia color, tap off the brush. I want one bending down right over my pumpkin here. So I'm gonna come up and bend and flick. Come up. me try adding a bit more white to the color. If you don't like something, because the background's nice and dry, you can wipe it off with a damp rag. I don't want anything coming into my chickadee territory, so I'm gonna make this leaf come down a little bit. We don't like that one either. Good thing for the damp paper towel. And you can have some just abstract taps up here at the tip of this stalk we have here. Just do some little taps coming up. You can even take some of our green color into some of this brown color. And this whole area, kind of this little bubble here, we can have lots of soft shapes. Adding the water to your paint, and sometimes I'll even kind of blur an area out with my finger if I want to keep some of the details softer. And the softer details look like they're a bit further away, which can be nice. Let's take some of this sepia color over here, and I'm gonna plan a bit more. I'm gonna have one of these leaves coming up and off here. I'm gonna fuzz it out with my finger a little, and then put a little tip on one of these plants. Some distant, expressive foliage, adding texture and a bit of context to this painting. So our distant garden. We will go ahead and highlight some of this later on. We've got this really bright whitish cream color highlighting the tips of the leaves here. And that's mimicked on this side with the corn. So we've kind of got a nice little bit of balance with the highlights here. From here, we're going to add a little bit of definition into the grass. We need to make sure our background is nice and dry. So let's give us a blast with our blow dryer. Spritz your paint to keep them nice and hydrated. And if you've never used a blow dryer before, you can turn it on hot. This is a little travel size blow dryer, and we'll move it all around. We're going to have some fun with our script liner in our grasses, playing with some of the variety of greens that we have made. Nice warm greens with our yellowy orange and our red orange. So you can load your script liner like this, and we're going to come across the bottom here and hold the script liner on and then just kind of wiggle it up. This is going to get some really lovely organic shapes. And I want you to keep it for now really dark brown around the base of the pumpkin. You can actually add some of your orange right in here. I'm holding it like this and just wiggling it up and all around. Even use some of that brown color we used in our distant plants. Add a bit of white, some of your warm green, for a few lighter layers. Keep the lightest layers at the base of the painting down here. And you can also use your mini fan for this. If you lose your dark area, your reddish brown, you just come in with a bit more around the base of the pumpkin. We're just kind of making this messy pattern as opposed to individual blades of grasses. Starting with a pattern like this, where we are using a long brush and pulling up, but we're not painting like each individual blade. By starting with a pattern like this, it gives our imagination something to grasp hold of, and it can create a bit more of a realistic effect in the end. As a lot of people think to create realism, it's about detail, but a lot of the time it's actually about all over textures. If you think about looking out at a grassy field, you don't see all the individual blades of grass, just the ones that are closest to your eye and your visual field that are picking up light. Most of it is more of a pattern and a texture than individual blades. Again, keeping it dark under the corn and the pumpkin because they're casting their own shadow here. Excellent. We're going to add to this grass later, but for now we're going to go ahead and start bringing in some of the details in the pumpkin. The first thing we're going to do is pull in a shadowy color for the grooves. I'm going to use some of my reddish brown, but I'm going to use a bit more red. So it's a dark reddish brown, like this, reddish brown. And let's come through the grooves of the pumpkin. So for those shadows, this is kind of the center bubble that's coming out of the pumpkin. Our light source is shining down this way. So the shadow's underneath the corn here because the light is coming down from up here. This is all in shadow, and the light is catching the side of the groove here. The shadow, though, is going to be on this section, where this section is bubbling in. Okay, so we've sketched out the sections. The shadow is on this side, right on this groove right here. And this is going to be dark along the bottom of the pumpkin too. So darker down here than it is at the top, closer to the light. So we can take some of our reddish brown into the bottom section of the pumpkin, as well as into the grooves. And you can add a bit more dark brown into the grooves to make it look a bit darker. And when I feather this color up from the bottom, I'm going to do a little bit of like a dry brush where the color is just gonna kind of, with a little bit of paint on the brush to help create that faded look. You can tap your brush. If you come with a brush loaded with paint and you try to put a stroke down, it's going to be a thick stroke. To dry brush, you either wait till your brush runs out of paint, or you can tap it off on a napkin, and then the dry brush you can feather up like this. So more of this dark color on the bottom. And if you like, you can kind of paint all the bottom sections first. And then dry brush it up. Creating a bit of a fade. And then we can take some dark brown into the shadowy sections. Now the shadows on this side of the pumpkin are always going to be on the right hand side. So here's this segment. The shadow is going to be on the next bobble here, kind of following the outside of this section. So this belongs to this little bobble. This belongs to this little bobble. And on this side of the centerpiece, the shadows are going to be on the opposite side. So now this shadow is part of this segment right here. Okay. We've got another little segment in behind. But this part of the pumpkin is all really deeply in shadow because of the corn. The corn is casting a shadow right on this whole section of the pumpkin. So this whole section can be quite dark underneath the corn right here. You can see that in the image right here. And then we have, it's really blocking the light from here. But in terms of shadows, you can have an object occluding light from reaching below, but you also have something called a cast shadow. And that's the darkest part of the shadow that's right under the object. So let's take some dark brown, even some dark brown with a bit of ultramarine. We'll make it really dark. Just make sure your ultramarine doesn't have any white in it. Burnt umber brown and ultramarine, when mixed together, make a color that's almost black. And you're going to pull out a little shadow that can actually come up and even casting a bit of a shadow right into the center bubble of the pumpkin right here. And here's the corn, by the way. I can outline it for you to see. Our little corn is like right here. Like this. And its shadow is right here, its biggest cast shadow. And back into our reddish brown. Let's just come around the edge of the pumpkin. Like this. Over here, go into a little bit of your brown and fill in your corn with some brown. And the little stalk of the corn is coming off the end. Good, we're getting in this nice dark underpainting. You're doing great. You can pause the video anytime you need to. This is your time to just play and explore. And if something I'm doing isn't working or you want a bit more time to explore the technique, pause the video or watch sections that interest you. Do things your own way. If it's not going your way, it's all good. Again, this is just time to become familiar with some aspects of layering acrylic paint. And here we are layering a dark underpainting layer, a dark base layer, so we can glaze the oranges over top and have the shadows already there for us. Let's go ahead and paint in our stem while we're waiting for this to dry. We'll want a small brush with a nice flat edge like this little 1/4 inch flat brush here. This 1/4 inch flat brush has a lovely, lovely flat edge to it. The stem of this pumpkin is quite dark and they are green, but they can look almost like a grayish brown color as well as they start to dry. So let's take some of our Hooker's green, mix it into some of our brown. We should get a really dark, dark brownish green color. It looks almost black. But if we thin it out, it's a brownish green. Remember, the stem attaches right to the pumpkin and we want it to come around these little nubbles and bubbles. So where these sections are, it's going to come around them. And the stem, if you recall, comes a little wider at the base and then mostly straight up before it starts to bend over. It's mostly the same width. A little bit bigger at the base. There is a wide range of pumpkins. Some of them are prized for really curvy or wonky stems. And in fact, when you buy pumpkin seeds, if you've never bought pumpkin seeds before, the stem of the pumpkin is often a selling point. I'm obsessed with pumpkins. I bought, I think, 56 varieties of seeds, and I only had room to plant 40 plants. And of those 40, only about 30 survived because we got attacked by these little beetles called cucumber beetles, which are super cute and like yellow and black striped, but they can eat a squash plant and like kill it in a matter of a couple of days. So we lost some to the beetles. but I got so many like warty ones called Scarface, pink ones, teal ones, one called a pink banana that gets upwards of 60 pounds. And I've got some big 30 pounders in my pumpkin patch, little sweet ones called Cinnamon Girl, Delicatas, Honey Nuts. Oh boy. The point for the painting is that you can take a lot of liberties with your pumpkin stem because they come in such a wide variety of shapes and sizes. I have the top of the stem angling down a little bit on this kind of angle. But again, all those little curly things you see at this point in the pumpkin's life are going to be quite dead because the stem here is dry. So we just have our perfect stem on our gorgeous orange pumpkin. Rinse that brush for me, and let's pick up a little one like the 1/4 inch wisp brush. And I'm not going to use the forked edge. I want a broken mark. So I'm going to use the long skinny edge like this. Okay, so not the forked part, the long skinny side. Now we're going to come into the color we use to paint our cloud, which is actually just white with a bit of yellow. And we'll create some grooves into this stem. So you can kind of tap across the top with a little highlight like this. And then we're going to have a big groove that's going to come from right here, kind of right in between these two little baubles. And we're going to do this right in the wet paint, okay? Wet and wet. Up we come and over. Give it a little bit of a width at the bottom so you can tap it in. It's just a little paint. Again, you can use the side edge here too. Oops. Wiping off all the paint. I'm just using what I have and I'm tapping up here to make it look a little bit messy. There's one highlight. And then we're going to have another one that comes and maybe kind of twists over the side a little bit. Oh, no, I don't want to do that. I'm just going to fuzz this together. I'm going to pull this one straight down, but not all the way down. And then I'm going to highlight on the stem, but right along the trunk, and making it a little lighter, maybe at the top of this side here, like this. I might even come into a little bit of my sepia brown that we used for our distant cornfield and tap that in to some of these highlights, giving them a little bit of a warmth. Using the broken tip or the side just to break this mark up a little bit. Come into some of your sepia color and tap a little bit into the far side on the very edge, this side here. Okay. Remember that light coming down this way. So we're going to have our brightest highlight on the ridges that are sticking up here. And you can even build up the paint so it's a little bit thicker here. And that can look really cool. That's something that portrait painters like Renoir did. Like the highlights on his nose are actually like gobs of white paint that he applied in pasto like this. And pasto just means raised from the surface. And we do have entire paintings that are all done in pasto, but the technique can be used like this too. Just to add little highlights that are raised from the background. Okay, so get that texture into the top of the pumpkin. And hopefully as you painted in the stem, This background part has dried. If not, let's give it a blast with our blow dryer and we'll keep on keeping on. Next up, juicy oranges and cob kernels, corn kernels. For the juicy flesh on our orange pumpkin, we're going to need that range of dark to light oranges again. So we want to make sure that we have enough of our color. Rinse off your number 6 bright brush. And remember that orange is just a mixture of yellow and red. To make the orange darker, you can add a bit more red, which will result in a darker orange. The red will quickly overpower the yellow, so add the red slowly to the orange. Another way that we can create orange is a bit more neutral is by adding a little bit of brown to it. So if we take some of our orange and add a little bit of our burnt umber brown, it's going to make more of a natural looking orange. So not quite so saturated. So let's take some orange with a bit of brown in it and a bit of red. This will be a darker color like this, like a really reddish orange with lots of brown. And put a little bit on the underside, the lower side of the pumpkin. This part is all pretty dark. So kind of in that lower half of the pumpkin, and don't worry if you go right over top of those dark lines that you made, they will show through. Orange is quite a see-through color. Then let's take a lighter, more yellowy orange, or even some of your brownish orange, whichever you prefer, like this, and start filling in from the top and blending down into the darker orange. It's going to be see-through. That's okay. For our transparent color, sometimes that's really nice because we can glaze over top of another color and see the color underneath, and that's called glaze painting. So that translucent quality to some of our colors is desirable sometimes. But when you want to build up in layers, don't worry if it looks patchy like this. We will get there. Just fill in the base coat with me for now. Carefully around the stem, but we can always touch it up, okay? Don't worry about the corn. That's going to get filled in later. So here's our base coat. Our nice medium yellowy orange color. To make this really pop, we've got to add some highlights in that yellowish brown color. Give me 1 second. I dipped my canvas into my palette, so the back is a hot rainbow mess. There we go. We're going to use this yellowy white color, and I want you to paint the light where you see the light in the demo. So we're going to take some yellow into some white. or even just some of your light orange into some white, will turn pretty yellowy as we add white to our color. Okay. We don't want our brush totally loaded with paint, so just a little bit on the tip. We've got to highlight the top of this section and under the shadow. And you can use some of your medium orange, just lightly hover to soften this together. Let it stay darker at the bottom. And look at that orange, really bringing the whole thing to life. So let's come back into this highlight color and pull a little bit down the whole side of our pumpkin here, letting it kind of blend into that coat underneath. Let it get darker towards the crevice, okay? This is this section bending in right here. So you've got to let it get darker into the middle and darker on the bottom of our pumpkin. And we're going to have a big highlight right on the section of the pumpkin before it kind of starts bending into the crevice, like right here. We're going to go whoop. I know the background color is still wet, so just really lightly try to pull this highlight on. And we'll beef it up a little bit in the next layer after this part dries a bit. Okay. Some of our highlight color down the back of this section, once again, letting it get darker in the crevice and towards the bottom of the pumpkin. You can wipe off your brush and just use a clean brush to try to feather this into the darker color below. Some of our highlight color, let's mix some of our highlight color with some orange. So we have a color that's not quite as light, but still a nice bright orange. So white into some of the orange to make a lighter orange around the, oh, that's too light. Gotta go a bit darker than that. Around the top of the pumpkin. Here. It's gonna be a bit lighter. And let's take some of that same color up here. You can add some more of your dark reddish brown into the crevices. Good. We can add a few more highlights to the pumpkin if we wish in the next layer of our painting, but for now, we're gonna let this dry. Actually, I'm gonna take some dark brown first. I'm gonna darken my crevice a little bit more. I really love me a nubbly bubbly pumpkin. And by darkening these cracks, it does really give that effect. And I might take some of this dark color and reintroduce the shadow, that cast shadow under the corn. And actually just clean up the tip of the corn here too with that dark underpainting. And we also have a shadow from the stem itself over here. So it's kind of following the edge of this nubbly bubbly pumpkin, getting a little wider towards the outside of the pumpkin. That's a shadow from the stem here, the stem. There we go. And I'm going to keep the bottom of my pumpkin really dark. Just gently fuzzing the line. So again, not blending all over, but just fuzzing the line where the light color meets the dark will help you blend without having it all become just one color. As the paint starts to dry, it kind of takes on more of a sticky feel, and it's a little bit easier to get finesse in the blending when the paint is not totally fully sopping wet. If you're ever in doubt, trust your eyes. Paint the light where you see the lights in your reference image or tutorial, and the darks where you see the darks. Okay, now we're gonna let this base layer dry, and we're gonna pull on a base layer for our corn on the cob. When we think about the shape of this corn on the cob, remember that it is, round. If we look down at the cob, not on its long side, but down at the cross section of it, it's a round shape. And when we have round shapes, I'm going to take some yellow into some white here. When we have round shapes, there's always a little bit of a curve to them. And this particular cob is going to curve like this. So we might have a kernel here. And maybe this is kind of like the full kernel. But then it's going to curve in a bit of a band. So 1, 2, 3, and then around the other side and around the back. Okay, so we've kind of got the curvature of the shape. And then kernels of corn, as you know, come in rows. The bottom side of the corn is going to be a little bit darker, so I'm going to use some of these more orangey and orangey red colors. But it's going to come up in rows. So this might be a little row right here. Coming down the cob. And I'm using my little 0 round brush for this. So we've got a row coming up and rows coming across. Towards the top of the cob, they're going to get a little bit smaller. Okay, so there's one row, and the top's going to be a little bit lighter, and these two kernels are kind of a bit more in the middle. So they're going to be a bit bigger towards the outside because it's wrapping around. We're going to see just a bit of the edges of them, so they look a little bit smaller. So you're going to get these shapes. Like this. Little kernels of corn. Coming up in this row here. Now they're going to get a bit smaller towards the top of the cob. And this one too is going to be a little bit shorter now than the last row coming up. I'm leaving a little space in between to try to get that cob-like texture. Yeah, so the top of the cob, I just have some little smaller kernels. Okay. And the same thing on the opposite side. So we're going to get some smaller kernels coming down, some darker orangey red ones on the lower side here. So taking some of my darker orangey red. Into some of the kernels on the slower side. This is a multicolored corn. I actually bought it, but I forgot to plant it this year. There's a corn called Glass Gem, and it's browns and reds and yellows and oranges, and it even has some blue colors in it. So it's almost like a full color spectrum. And it's not a corn that you eat. It's kind of like a decorative corn, like this one. But it's so colorful. I'm sad I didn't plant it, but there's only so many hours in a day, and I tend to spend most of mine painting things. And you can get into your lighter colors around the top edge. And you can pull in some different light colors. You can mix some lighter oranges in with your light yellows. Rinse your brush and take some white and some yellow for a really light whitish yellow color. And we're going to highlight some of these kernels. Remember, the light is coming down this way. So think of these as three-dimensional objects. We might get a highlight just on the upper part of a few of our kernels, like up here. And some light hitting the little bits towards the very tip of the cob. And you can even add a bit of a lighter orange, though keep it darker than the highlights on top. We can highlight some of these little kernels too. Or add another layer of color. We're working from a dark backdrop, so it will get darker as it dries. Just like with the pumpkin, a second coat is often the answer for this. So while all the paint is still really wet, it can be hard to get these little highlights in here. And sometimes we can make a grand old mess taking the easy way out and trying to do all the highlights wet and wet What we really need to do is let it dry. So I'm going to take my own advice. Here's my kernels extreme close up. Okay. Extreme. Let's let this dry and add our final highlights into our cob of corn and our pumpkin. We need to make sure our pumpkin layer is nice and dry, so I'm going to turn this on hot and give it a blast. The final highlight is when our pumpkins really come to life. I'm going to grab my little 1/4 inch flat here, but you could also use your bright brush. And I'm going to add some white to some of the light orange or some yellow, so we have a warm, light highlight color. Really light color. And tap your brush off so there's just a little bit of paint on it. And we're going to put these brightest highlights here, here, and here. So you've got a little highlight right here. And kind of right under where the shadow is, right here. I'm going to blend this in with a little bit of my slightly darker orange. If you need to blend an edge, rinse your brush off so that it's clean and damp, and just lightly feather it. Alternatively, you can take some of your darker color and put it below. Let's take some of that light color along the inside edge, leaving a little bit of a gap for the darkness. And then take one of your medium oranges to just help blend that down, letting it fade into the dark color below. We should get a pretty juicy bright highlight right about here. If your orange feels a little bit thin, you can always put a layer of the pure saturated color again right over top. So that's your darker oranges. If you feel like it needs a bit more saturation, just add a little bit more on there. But again, we do want that shadow color. At the bottom of the pumpkin. And I might start with another juicy layer of the bright orange over here. And then pull in that little highlight just right at the top of the pumpkin here. And then if you tap your brush off, you can use a cleanish brush to then just feather the wet highlight into the wet orange, letting it trail off. So this creating that lovely bubbly curve in the pumpkin. And for the rest of it, we don't really have any bright highlights, but we could take some more of our saturated medium orange. Maybe lighten it a little bit for up here. Okay, and with those couple of highlights, we're done the pumpkin. You can see if you want to add any little highlights into the top of the stem. If you do, just very lightly tap a little color. The texture should look a little bit rough. So not a smooth line, kind of like tap and create a broken texture. I use that whisk brush, okay? There we go. Good. When you are finished this, we're going to pull the corn husks around the edge of the corn and highlight that so that we're only really highlighting the kernels that show through. We do cover up a nice bit of the base of the corn. I'm going to come into this sepia color that we made for the base of this. Just a little brown and white with a little bit of orange in there. I'm going to go back to this bristly fan brush and I'm going to lightly start at the top using just the very edge of my brush. And I'm going to pull down, tap across the top, just using the corner, and I'm going to pull across a little highlight on the cob. And then we have 1, 2, 3 of these coming out. And this one on top here kind of comes up over the corn and then really kind of curves quite close to the corn, getting a bit bigger towards the base. And then we have another one opening up in the other direction. So you can do that same technique where you kind of come up and over the corn, almost creating this little V shape around the base of the cob. Our little chickadee will be sitting here, so we want to leave some space for that. Okay, and then maybe we'll have another little bit peeling up and off. Okay. And then we've got another one kind of maybe coming from the other side that's sticking out pretty close to this cob here. It's kind of coming up from the other side. Make it come to a point like this. And let's have another little loose one coming down. So coming off the base, maybe coming down and off, down below. Okay, so we've got these little crispy bits of husk coming off of our lovely piece of corn. We want to highlight this with some really light whitish color, so some white, just a trace of the sepia color in there, or a trace of yellow. It should be an almost pure white color. Steal some of this white. It has a little bit of the creamy warmth in it from the brown. It's not pure white, but it is a light beige color. And the light is coming down and hitting some of these husks really very much right here for this one. Gonna come up each side, let some of the dark color show through maybe. There we go. And then this one, It's kind of coming right out from the base there too. There's that little base. And this one's going to come up, maybe dip it down a little, highlight the top and just be really kind of rustic with it. Let some of the dark color show through. This one here is coming from underneath a little bit, so it might come down on each side of this little bit. And then the part that's folding over here is catching a lot of light before it then kind of bends down. This one's coming up from the base too. Getting some thick paint on there, juicy. This one's coming from the other side, so maybe we'll just catch a bit of light on the tip of this one here. We're gonna add some pure whites to this later on. Let's bring a little bit of this color, which we have kind of in the tip here too, don't we? Up here. Now let's bring a little bit into some of these bits of foliage. So remember, taking the skinny side of this brush, coming up, then using the corner and creating some highlights on the front parts of these leaves here. One, you can create a whole new leaf too if you don't like where some of your others were. Maybe highlighting the tip of this here. Just a few highlights just to create a little trail of light. I don't know how I feel about this one. If there is any time where you don't like something, as long as the background is dry, you can take a paper towel or an old rag that's clean with just a bit of water on it and wipe it off. Sometimes if there's a lot of residual paint, you have to get a clean part and wipe it a bit better, but you can wipe for sure. I'm going to use more of a light brown there. There we go. I'm not going to overdo it, just a few. Just a few. A little bit of pure white on the stem, the top right there. I like that. If you have some pure white, you can add a few highlights in the pure white too on these little husks. Just on a few bits. If you've ever shucked some corn, you know that there's lots of little bits. Dry husk. With our pumpkin highlighted and our corn husks highlighted. Oops. I think our cob is begging for a few little highlights too, to really bring the light and life into this section of the painting where the chickadee is going to be standing. With it nice and dry, we can do two things. We can add more saturated color and we can add little highlights, focusing more on the top side of the corn. So for the saturated color, you could say go into some plain yellow and layer it over top of a dry kernel to get that really juicy yellow. It's hard to do in just one coat to get juicy warm colors. Across brands, this is a tricky thing to achieve. You have to do 2 layers, even if you had the most opaque titanium white added to your yellow to get the dark saturated color. It definitely needs that double coat. Gonna have different colors in there. Some orange kernels or some red kernels. Multi corns that are for decorating have different colors. Add a few pure whites into here as well. Highlights. And some of these corns. When you feel like it pops from a distance, and do start looking at this. For these lessons, I always, practice them and plan the lesson. So the lesson is concise, but this will be your first time ever creating this painting. And you'll need to step back from your work to assess whether the values are right. Values are lights and darks, and it's the lights and darks that create form in a painting. So sometimes we need to tweak things as we go. Sometimes it can look like it's a huge mess, but it's really just one or two highlights that we need. Okay, here's an extreme close-up. There's little dots and dabs in there, okay? You've got this. And pause if you need to. Before we move on to do our chickadee, I want to pull some lighter grasses up over the pumpkin and around the corn. I'm going to use my script liner, or you could use your fan brush like this. And go into your greens, add some orange if you need to. So here we can pull a few right up and over that pumpkin. Keep it dark around the base of the pumpkin and the corn. So most of your highlights are going to kind of come along the bottom of the grass. Trust your vision, paint lights where you see lights and darks where you see darks. Sometimes I'll even take my tan color, this light color, and add a bit of green and come along the bottom. Or some oranges. We definitely have little bits of leaves in here for sure on the ground. There's autumny colors everywhere. Oops, did I drop green in my sky? I did. So here, my clean damp napkin, and I'm gonna just wipe this off. I have some residual green, so I need to rub it a bit more, but you can save any painting. If you want to paint a few individual blades, now is the time where you can. take some of your light beiges or greens into the very bottom. When you feel like you're finished with those grasses. Okay, here they are, extreme close up, just pattern all over. Okay. And I like to take that script liner and just don't be afraid to get on in there. We are done the pumpkin and the corn. Now this could be a complete painting just like this, but if you love birds, they add such a little bit of life to a painting. And if you're interested in how to draw birds, stick around. You can pause the video, let this dry, spritz your paints, or even if you want to paint the bird tomorrow, just stick your paints in a stay wet palette and keep them covered. The chickadee is black and white with just a little bit of our beige. So we're actually only going to use that one little bit of our sepia brown color, brown plus orange. The rest of these we are done with. So you could even let your palette dry if you want to paint the bird on later. But if you want to stick around and paint this little chickadee with me, just a bunch of basic shapes, a circle and an oval and a triangle. So let's go ahead and get started. Grab your pencil because we're gonna sketch this cute little black cap chickadee right here. Grab your pencil. Actually, let's give our background a little bit of a dry. That way we won't, drag our arm in this while we're drawing. Take your blow dryer and let's give this a blast. Once your background is nice and dry, we're going to go ahead and sketch on our chickadee just a few basic shapes, just like we did with the pumpkin and the corn. So we're going to place our chickadee right about here. And I want to start with an oval shape for the body. So the little guy's we put a little line for where we want the kind of angle of his body to go, or her. We've got this little line right here, nice and close. So the feet, the bottom of the oval, we're just going to draw a little oval shape like this. The bottom of the oval should be really close to the pumpkin and the corn. Let's do a little oval shape. Okay. And then the head is kind of like a circle or an oval shape on top. You can also just kind of come up like this and drop it down into the chest. Okay. Their heads are pretty flat. They're not super round. And then we're going to have a little triangle kind of coming out the back, flat across the back like this. Let me grab a bit of a darker pencil. So we're going to have a little line coming off the back like this. And from there, that's where the tail feathers come out. So the tail feathers are going to come right out in behind the corn like this. And then we're going to have the wing. The shoulder of the bird is about here. And the wing is going to kind of cut across the body like this. Kind of represented like a little triangle coming across the back of the bird. So let's refine the shape a little bit. We're going to have a tiny beak coming out if you were to put a little plus sign in the middle of the face, like this, okay, the beak would come right out of the middle, like a tiny little triangle, like this, okay? And the eye is going to sit in line with the beak, if we have that little line coming through, just above and on the side of the plus sign that's closer to the beak. So we'll have a little eye here. And this is also where the kind of black cap is on the black-capped chickadee. So the black cap kind of comes around the top of the head and towards the beak. Keep that head nice and flat for me. So the head should be nice and flat and the neck of the bird coming right down towards the body. This is going to be the black cap, so it's going to be all dark at the top. And there's a little bit of blackness kind of coming along the top of the body here too. Okay. So right under the chin, going to have a little bit of black there as well. The breast of the bird comes out and kind of flattens under here and then wraps right around like that. So instead of a soft oval, I like to kind of put a few little angles on the shape. The leg will come out towards the bottom of this oval here, and another one here, right onto the corn. You can even do a little hook where the little foot is kind of hooking onto the, standing on there. Okay. The wing is going to start up towards the top of the body, like this. And it's going to swoop around, and the back is mostly flat. Okay. A little gentle curve in it. And these are the basic shapes for our chickadee. The rest is going to be filling this in with paint. The chickadee is mostly black and white, so make sure you have a little bit of black poured somewhere on your palette. You don't need a lot, just a tiny little squirt. You're also going to need some white. So pour some white out on your palette. If you have a little 1/4-inch whisk brush, one that's, 1/4-inch wide and has the little segments come out of it, these are really lovely for pulling in the texture of the bird's feathers. Okay, so that's these guys right here. Let's start with our blacks. Just a little black on the tip of your brush. And we're gonna just tap it into the head, okay? So let's just tap, tap, tap along the black cap. I like this brush because when you pull it, the wispy edges kind of create a little feathery look if you gently, gently pull at the edges with that tip. Or you can make them really fluffy. I know the babies are really fluffy. Let's get the black under the chin, coming right up to the beak. And we've got this little kind of swoosh of white in the face. You can very lightly tap along where your belly is going to be. There's going to be black in the wing, You can lightly tap down the back of the bird as well and into that wing, which is going to come across the body. Like this. You can add a little water to your paint to help it flow. Let's pull out 2 tail feathers. 1, 2. We're looking right on the side. So it's just going to look pretty thin. And for the little feet, this is why we have our little 0 round brush. This little guy is going to really help us get those tiny details. Add a little bit of water to some of your black. It just really helps the paint flow into the small spaces. Make sure to look at the tip of your brush and that you have a nice intact edge before coming in to do the beak. Just a little delicate beak. And the same with the little feet. Coming out. And a little hook. A little C shape onto the corn. All right, let's take some white and add the tiniest little bit of brown or black so that it's just a little bit off white to start. And fill in the white part of the face. It's going to kind of look a bit gray at this point in the painting. This darker shadow for the white is what's going to allow, excuse me, the white highlights to pop, but give the bird some plumage, some texture. If it's just all white, it won't show as like the texture of the fur. Bring some of this gray down towards the wings and into the front of the belly here. Again, this can be kind of like a grayish white. Underneath the belly's in shadow. Remember the light's coming down this way. So let's get some gray into the bottom of the belly here. And then we need a little bit of our sepia brown. That's brown with a little bit of orange or a bit of yellow in it. And a bit of the darker brown on the underside of the belly here too. A little bit up here. You can make them look a bit fluffy by having some of the little hairs stick out of the breast. Okay. Come into take your brownish yellow color and mix it with some white. So we have a light goldeny yellow color, and fill in the highlight side of the belly, which is right here, where the light's kind of hitting a little tapping strokes. I'm going to touch up the shoulder of the wing a little bit right here. And the blacks on the chin. make sure that you've got a little circle. It's for the eye right here. It's kind of drooping down below the black cap a little bit. Okay. You're doing great. Take your time. Most of all, just have fun with this. Okay. Come into your light gray color and look at the tip of your brush. Make sure you can see that it's got a nice fine point, and let's take some of this light gray right into the very top of the beak right here. And also around the eye. Around the eye to the top of the beak. So a little detail. Go into a tiny little bit of pure white. This is the tiniest little detail. Make sure you have the tiniest little tip on your brush and put a little highlight in the upper side of the eye right here. Okay? Boop, right there. Good. Excellent. Finally, we're going to add some detail, some white into the mask and the face, and some lines down the wings, which are going to indicate feathers. We're almost there on the final details. Stick with me. We've got to dry this layer so that we can get into some crisp, clean white. With the background nice and dry, you can go into a few whites. Use your little detail brush or the fine edge of a fan or whisk brush. And here we're going to pull in some little taps, letting some of the darker color show through. A few little taps into the belly right here. And you can add a little bit more of that really light yellow color too, just right under here where some of the light is hitting the belly. But we do want to keep it pretty dark. Otherwise, down below. Take a little bit of that light color into the top, the back here. And for those little details in the wing, grab your little zero round brush and go into some white. We're going to pull a few lines down the wing. Ooh, a little too much water, it dripped everywhere. We're going to pull a few lines down the wing like this. The wing comes across the top of the tail. 1, 2, like this, and then a little bit of light right at the top. We're also going to take a little bit of white and pull 2 lines, indicating the tail feathers are coming out underneath here too. Okay, and that is it for our little chickadee. Take a minute and assess your highlights. Take some time and look at your painting to make sure that you're happy with it. See if there's any last minute highlights you might want to do. So now it's time for any final tweaky deakies. Maybe highlighting some of the corn. Congratulations on completing your autumn harvest chickadee. You've drawn and painted this entire scene from start to finish, and that is something to truly celebrate. Every brushstroke that you have made is part of your unique creative journey. And remember, this is your work made entirely by you, so be proud of what you've accomplished today. If you'd like to share your finished work, don't forget to post in our private Facebook sharing group. I'll post a link below. I would love to see what you've created and celebrate alongside you. It's important not to compare your painting to mine or anyone else's. Art is all about personal expression and learning, and each piece is a step towards growing and refining your skills. If you would like to revisit this tutorial, don't forget it's free for an entire week, so come back and paint at your own pace. Or if you would like a copy for lifetime access, you can tip to own it for just $5, and a copy is sent directly to your email. If you're ready to dive even more into creative projects, consider joining my Kick Academy for access to this class and over 531 others, including everything from beginners, paintings, black canvas landscapes, still life, florals, cute seasonal themes. The sky is the limit. This tutorial is available inside the Kick Academy, so don't forget, if you are already a member, you can paint this at any time, but I highly encourage you to paint it now during this harvest season to really embrace those autumn vibes. Most importantly, I encourage you to keep having fun and celebrating your progress. Every painting that you create helps you see the world in new and exciting ways. Until next time, I hope you keep it colorful, and I can't wait to see what you will create next. Let's take a peek at some of the other classes that we have coming up. We painted this chickadee last weekend, but coming up we have a autumn wreath. We're getting into Halloween. We're going to paint a witch moon face and this really beautiful spooky owl. In October, I have more classes coming for you as well. By popular demand, we're going to do a tree challenge where I'm going to break down how to create trees in all the seasons. We'll start with autumn. We'll do evergreen trees as well as deciduous trees like oaks, maple, and birches. This is going to be technique based. So you'll have exercises to do. I'm going to show you how to draw the trunk, brushwork, how to draw and understand the basic structure of branches, the best brushes for creating foliage, and how to see foliage as volume before we add texture. Then we'll do the same thing with coniferous or evergreen trees, and then come winter, we'll do a whole other section on winter trees. In spring, we'll do spring trees. Trees are such an integral part of landscapes, and I can't wait to see the trees that you will create. Again, this is individual trees that you can add to any of your projects. So these types of technique-based challenges will help you come up with your own composition. And to end each lesson, each season of tree paintings that we'll do, we are going to create our own composition together and really give you the wings to fly and start creating the things you see in your head. I will hope you join me for the tree challenge. I realize we don't have the little bit of leaf in the chickadee's mouth. Let's take a little brush. If you want to have this bit, and it is cute, we can add a little leaf by pulling some, just a rough little bit. I'm using a wisp brush here of foliage out from his mouth, and then highlighting the top with a lighter color. It's kind of like a little piece coming into the beak. And then to create that look of shadow, it has to be darker on the bottom. And we'll want to get into some really light whitish yellow at the top of the leaf. And that's all I did for this little bit. And you can add that in there too. I think it adds a cute little touch. Perhaps I'll see you for the tree challenge or for some weekend painting or inside the Kick Academy membership if you're painting up a storm. That is it for me. Take care. Happy October. Until next time, I hope you keep it colorful.